We are recording the newest assignment in computer animation, and what we're going to be working on for this animation project is creating a firework effect along with creating a spotlight effect on some text. Both animation effects are going to utilize masking, which is something that we've been using in a few animation assignments recently, and so kind of build upon that and then show you some other techniques that can be used to create the illusion of these fireworks splashing and spotlights shining on something. So when we start looking at this project, we'll go ahead and start a new document. And actually what we're going to do in this project that we have not in others to date yet is to embed a movie clip inside of a graphic. Okay, and up to now we have really just we've just made kind of graphic movie clips, but we had them all inside of our main timeline. So what we're going to do today is to make a little bit different approach and make a movie clip that's actually entirely inside of this tiny little rectangle that I just drew here. So actually what we will do first off is name the first layer of your project, and we will name that firework 1. Okay, and on that layer all we want to have right now is this small little rectangle underneath the bottom of your stage, because that's where we want our firework to actually start off from. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this to actually make it a little easier to see. And when I select it, we're going to make this a gradient, a linear gradient, and as you can see it flash saved kind of my previous colors. I'm going to, for the sake of making a good walkthrough, I'm going to adjust my colors to what I assume yours might pop up to be when you first open Flash on your own computer. So I'm going to make this a black and white gradient, which is usually the standard when you first open up Flash. Oops, mouse got away. And so if this is what your square looks like, and then when you go to create a linear gradient, what we want to actually have is a gradient that has alpha turned down on either end, and then in the center we want to have 2 colors. Okay, so I'm going to click right below the middle of the gradient bar to add another color there, and about halfway in between these two on the right side to create another color spot right there. Okay, so we have 4 colors ideally. The 2 in the middle should actually be colors. I'll go ahead and make a choice, maybe a light green for this one, and then this color here, maybe I'll make it kind of like a purple. Alright, and then like I was saying, the last 2 colors we want to turn the alpha down to 0, okay, so that the gradient is transparent on either end. Okay, so 2 colors in the center and then transparent on the edges. Okay, so when we look at this right now, it's going side to side, which isn't the way we want it to go. So we're going to use our gradient transform tool, and we are going to rotate this gradient, grabbing it by the corner and turning it and rotating. And then we are going to stretch out this gradient. Oops, I'm getting some issues with, oh, okay. There we go. So I'm kind of stretching out the gradient that way. Just grabbing it by the box with the arrow is going to stretch out your gradient. And so that is really the basis of what we are going to start here. Okay, so like I was saying, our entire animation is going to be based out of this. Not entire, but the firework animation is going to be based out of this image right here. We're going to press F8 and convert this graphic into a movie clip. And we'll call this firework 1 as well. Okay, so your stage should look like this when we zoom out. You have a tiny little gradient down at the bottom of your scene, and nothing else there. 1 layer and 1 movie clip right down here which is going to be a firework. So when I go ahead and double click on this, I'm inside of the movie clip firework 1, and we have a new timeline. So what I'm going to do on this timeline is I am going to go to maybe the 50th frame or so, and what I'm going to actually do, before I do that, I'm going to go back to my gradient transform tool. I'm going to give this a slight tilt so that my firework takes off at an angle. It doesn't go directly straight up. And what I'll do then is go out to the 50th keyframe or so and press F6. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm going to go to my transform tool, and on the 50th keyframe I'm going to stretch or extend this gradient upwards into sort of a stream, and I'm going to move it over a little bit. Oh, I didn't want to bend it quite yet. That is something we could do though. I just want to select it and move it a little bit. There we go. And I just wanted to make sure that it was lined up with the original spot where the firework base was supposed to be. Now, zooming up or scrolling up a little bit, I can see that this isn't quite as big as I wanted it to be, and I'm going to need to extend it up just a slight bit more. Maybe rotate it again. Again, key thing is to remember that it needs to line up with where that original positioning was. So right there, that looks pretty good. I say that's going about high enough on my screen where a firework explosion could take place and be realistic, and still leave room below for the text that we're going to add in. So next thing we want to do is go ahead in our timeline here and go to about the 7th keyframe. We're going to press F6 again, and on this keyframe now, 70th, we're going to bring this beam back to a small beam. Now that got a little bit smaller than I wanted it to be. So I'm going back to my transform tool and making it a little bit bigger. I suppose it is going to fade to nothing. So if it is a little thin, then that is okay. Actually, probably better than it being too thick. Okay, so what we should see here is we are going to add shape tweens in now, but if we have a small piece that extends into a larger one, that then extends into a smaller one. Okay, and we are going to add shape tweens to these. First thing before we add the shape tween is I'm going to go right after that last keyframe. I'm going to press F6 again, and I'm actually going to press the delete key and delete my kind of firework stream. I actually realized that I did not title this. I'm going to name this tail. It's kind of the tail of the firework shooting into the sky. So I'm going to go ahead here and just like in your version of Flash here, we have the shape tween down below. And remember, this should be a raw graphic in order for it to be a shape tween. I'll go ahead and add another shape tween in there. So ideally what should happen is we have a growing stream that goes up and then disappears. Right? So what we can get into next is adding 2 new layers, and this is actually going to create the explosion of the firework. So 2 new layers in there. The top one we will name mask, because this will be a mask ultimately, and this one we will name gradient. And where we want to go to work right now is about, let's say, a couple frames after the streak reaches the sky, so maybe about the 55th frame or so. We'll go ahead and we can shift click on both of these timeline spots and press F6 to create a new keyframe on either of those layers. On this layer, what we're going to do is create a circular gradient right here where the fireworks should be exploding. So I'm going to use my oval tool, and I'm going to press and hold shift to pull and drag out my gradient. Now what you'll notice is my gradient is still linear, so I'm going to go to radial, and hopefully that will turn my gradient radial. There you can see I kind of took that fill and went ahead and filled it. I want to make sure that this gradient is still transparent on either end. And it looks like maybe this did not remain transparent still, so I need to turn down the alpha on the very end of this gradient. Okay, so it still looks like it's not quite. I'm going to go down just a little bit. There we go. Sometimes Flash can be a little tricky, so we'll do these little things. We could enter in 0 and press enter, and maybe that will really do it. Okay, so that just lightens it up a little bit. Once we actually make the background black, which is something that I should have done a couple steps earlier. So what I'm going to do is back up a step really quick. I'm going to go back out to my scene, all right, and I'm going to make the background black. So if I'm back out on my scene, remember my whole firework is going to be just contained within this little bar down here of a movie clip. Okay, so when I click over here, you can see that that's what this movie clip is in my library. So again, I want to make my background black. Okay, so it's black like the night, and our scene will actually stand out. So I'm going to take my arrow tool and double click back on my gradient to go back into the firework effect that we had started to create before. So as this tail grows, and then you can see the gradient pop out there, and then it disappears. So on the layer above that one is where we're going to draw our mask. So I'm going to take my brush tool, and something we want to make sure we do is turn the smoothing all the way up. We want this smoothing number to be at 100. If that's where that is, that's going to make our brush marks go a little bit more smoothly so that they appear more realistic as far as looking like fireworks goes. So I'm going to zoom in on my gradient a little bit. I'm going to make my timeline a little smaller so that I can have a little more space in the middle here for working on this. And take my brush tool, I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger, maybe one size up from that. Okay, that should work. And I'm going to take a color that is bright and different from what I have right now in my gradient. So I'm going to take an orange because that will stand out against this gradient. And what we're going to do then is kind of make some brush marks that all kind of lead in towards the center of the gradient. And so on the left side, they'll kind of splash out towards the left. And you can always Windows Z if you do not like one of your splash marks, and just back up, make a new one. Some shorter ones on the edges is a nice thing to add. Maybe one in the middle there. And have a little bit of variety to the size and shape of your splashing kind of firework marks. Okay, so what we should have ideally is this shape above and the gradient below on the gradient layer, and then the mask up top. Okay, what we're going to do is take these, now that we have them, and convert them into graphics. So I'm going to press F8 to convert this gradient into a graphic, and I will call this, just call it grade, and press enter. And then on the mask, I'm going to also turn it into a graphic, so press F8 again, and I will call this one mask. Okay, so what we can do now is we're going to go ahead in our animation just a little ways, about to, let's say, the 75th frames or so, and we will press F6 again to get a new keyframe there. And what we should be doing after that is going back to this first set of keyframes we made right here. These we're going to want to shrink really small, because when the firework first starts out, it should be tiny, right? It should be almost non-existent. So I'm going to make this gradient really small, okay? And that's on this 55th keyframe, and I'm also going to do the same with the mask. So I'm going to make the mask small, and ideally what should happen is that the gradient should fit inside the center of the mask. So it almost looks like a flower here when you look at it lined up kind of with the tail, and then there's sort of like this flower at the end of it. and that's what should be we should see on this 55th keyframe right here. Then when it goes to the 75th, it's a little bit bigger, and we'll go a little bit further down the timeline to the 100th frame. We'll select both of those layers by holding Shift and then clicking on the other and pressing F6 again. And now on this layer, what we'd like to do is we are going to, oops, I zoomed in a little bit too far, but there we are. And we're going to take our transform tool and we're going to make these a little bit bigger. Okay, so extend them up a little bit. Something that's important to note too is that you want everything to stay lined up in the center. Okay, so make sure that you're not pulling things too far off to the side, otherwise it won't quite line up right and look the way we want it to look. What we want this last layer to do, or the last keyframe of our gradient timeline to do, is to fade out to nothing. Okay, so we want to fade the alpha on this gradient layer. Okay, so if I take my selection arrow tool and I select this gradient, what should come up at the bottom of your properties bar here is a dialog box that says color. It should say none, but if we go down to alpha, we should be able to take the alpha on this graphic and adjust it. So if it starts off at 100, usually that's the case, we drag that down to 0. That's what we want to have happen with our firework. We want it to start small, to get bigger, and then to fade to nothing, right? And now all that's left really to do here, we have the framework of all our keyframes, is we want to go in and just add some motion tweens. So we're going to add 2 motion tweens to the mask, 2 motion tweens to the gradient, and actually I have not created or turned this mask layer into a mask yet, so I'll also right click on that and turn that top layer into a mask. So now what we should have is a working firework animation. So why don't we give this a test run? So you have the gradient kind of shooting up from the bottom. What I'm noticing is that it's going really slow, but it seems to work. So what I would like to do with this is turn up the frame rate just a little bit. I'll maybe go ahead up to say like 50 frames a second and oops, zoomed in on that a little bit there. Zoom out and preview this again, and like you can see there, 50 is much better. We could even probably turn that up a bit more and try 60 frames a second, and that works pretty good. Okay, so what we are going to go over in our next assignment or next second part of this video is we're going to go over making another firework. We're going to add 2 more. One can just be a repeat of this first one. Alright, so when you see when I exit back out to my stage here, all that we should see in our main file of our animation is this tiny gradient at the bottom and a black background. And if we open up our library, and if your version of Flash does not have the library open right away, you'll want to go to Window, scroll down to find Library, and a window should pop up. As I clicked it, it made mine go away, but I'll bring it back. And a nice spot to keep it is the lower right hand corner here. What we can do is scroll through our library. I could actually pull out Firework from here, alright, the movie clip, and I could actually have 2 of those running right next to each other. Okay, so once you've got the work done for one, you can really use that as many times as you'd like. What I might do here really quickly is take this and rotate it so that it actually fires in the other direction. And like I was saying, what we'll do in our next second part of this lesson, assignment lesson, is we will add in an effect using a mask over some type, and we'll also add in another firework with some different colors going off in the center of these 2.